To approach the phenomenon of telekinesis through a rigorous scientific lens, we must first dismantle the parlor trick imagery of floating spoons and replace it with the staggering complexity of macroscopic quantum manipulation and fine-tuned entropic reversal. If a human being were to influence a physical object without mechanical contact, we are not looking at a violation of the laws of physics, but rather the utilization of a biological field interface that operates on the scale of the four fundamental forces. The most plausible candidate for a telekinetic mechanism lies within the quantum brain dynamics (QBD) hypothesis, which suggests that the brain's microtubules, the structural scaffolds within our neurons, do not just process information through electrochemical signals, but function as coherent quantum resonators. For telekinesis to manifest, the brain would need to act as a Bose-Einstein condensate, a state of matter where billions of particles act as a single quantum entity. This would allow a person to project a coherent waveform beyond the skull, interacting directly with the zero-point field, the sea of energy that fills every cubic centimeter of the vacuum. In this model, the telekinetic doesn't push an object, they synchronize with the object's molecular vibration, effectively turning the target into an extension of their own nervous system via macro-scale quantum entanglement. The energy requirements for such a feat are, quite literally, astronomical. To lift a 1 kilogram object against Earth's gravity, one must overcome a force of 9.8 newtons. In a standard human metabolism, energy is produced via the oxidation of glucose, resulting in about 100 watts of power at rest. Telekinesis would require a metabolic overclocking of several orders of magnitude. The telekinetic brain would need to be a high-energy biological reactor, perhaps utilizing a localized form of cold fusion or an advanced proton gradient within the mitochondria that we haven't yet identified in standard biology. From a thermodynamic perspective, the act of moving an object at a distance creates a massive amount of waste heat. If you move a chair with your mind, why doesn't your brain cook inside your skull? The answer would have to involve localized entropy export. The practitioner would need to be a master of Maxwell's demon logic, selectively siphoning the kinetic energy of surrounding air molecules, creating a pocket of freezing air to fuel the kinetic motion of the target. This would explain the cold spots often reported in folklore. It is not a ghostly presence, but the thermal debt being paid to the universe to satisfy the second law of thermodynamics. Furthermore, we must address the coupling problem. How does a biological thought translate into a vector force? This would necessitate the existence of biological gravitons, or, more likely, the manipulation of electromagnetic dipole-dipole interactions. If the human brain could generate a focused longitudinal scalar wave, it could theoretically induce a charge imbalance in the distant object, creating a Lorentz force strong enough to repel or attract matter. However, the precision required is terrifying. To move a glass of water without shattering it, the mind must calculate the stress tensors of the glass and the fluid dynamics of the liquid in real time. This implies that the telekinetic cortex isn't just a muscle. It is a quantum supercomputer, capable of performing trillions of partial differential equations per second at a subconscious level. We are describing a neural space-time interface, where the human will becomes a local variable in the geometry of the universe. The telekinetic is not breaking gravity, they are editing the metric tensor of the space between themselves and the object, creating a gravitational slope that the object simply slides down. If we move beyond the theoretical physics and into the brutal biological reality of neurokinetic coupling, we must confront the biomolecular stress that such a capability would impose on a living organism. For the brain to function as a macroscopic quantum projector, the neural architecture would need to undergo a radical metabolic hardening. We are talking about neurons shielded by a specialized high dielectric myelin, a biological insulator, capable of containing the massive electromagnetic flux generated during a telekinetic event. Without this, the electrical discharge would lead to neural arcing, literally frying the synaptic pathways and causing catastrophic neuroelectrical storms, or instantaneous exorcism-like seizures. To survive the heat of its own processing, the telekinetic brain would likely require a super-efficient cooling system, perhaps a highly vascularized thermal sink in the prefrontal cortex, or a unique cerebrospinal fluid that acts as a cryogenic coolant. circulating at high speeds to prevent the gray matter from reaching protein's denaturation temperatures. This isn't just a superpower. It is a biological overhaul that turns the human head into a high-performance microreactor. Expanding on this, we must look at the neurosignaling mechanics of the act itself. In a standard human, the brain communicates with the muscles through the peripheral nervous system via chemical neurotransmitters. In a telekinetic, the brain must develop a fifth appendage, a field-based effector. This would be achieved through the synchronization of neural oscillations in the gamma range, 40 to 100 Hz. If a person could consciously control the phase coherence of these waves across the entire cortex, they could create a synthetic scalar field. This field doesn't travel through space like a radio wave. It couples with the Higgs field, or the quantum vacuum itself. This is the spooky action at a distance made macroscopic. When the telekinetic focuses on an object, they are creating a quantum bridge, a state of temporary identity between the observer and the observed. For that brief moment, the chair or the stone is not other. It is part of the self-model in the parietal lobe. The brain doesn't send a signal to the object. It simply decides to move itself, and because the object is entangled, it follows the kinetic instruction as if it were a limb. However, the information feedback would be overwhelming. To lift a heavy object, the brain must feel the weight, the center of gravity, and the structural integrity of the target. This requires a telekinetic proprioception. The practitioner would experience virtual sensory data, feeling the coldness of the metal or the roughness of the wood through a field-mediated touch. This leads to the cognitive load paradox. If you are moving 1,000 pieces of shrapnel simultaneously, your brain must track 1,000 vector trajectories in 3D space. This would necessitate a massively parallel neural architecture, effectively splitting the consciousness into thousands of sub-processors. This shattered awareness is the only way to prevent a data bottleneck that would lead to a processing freeze. Furthermore, the evolutionary origin of such a trait would likely be a survival response to high-G environments, or extreme spatial isolation, where the ability to manipulate the environment at a distance offered a decisive fitness advantage. We are looking at a mutation in the ASPM gene, or the FOXP2 regulator, shifting the brain from a symbolic processor to a geometrical operator. Finally, let us consider the physics of the vacuum scar. Every time a telekinetic manipulates matter, they are tearing at the local symmetry of space-time. This creates virtual particle pairs and localized gravitational ripples that linger in the environment long after the object has landed. This is kinetic residual. To a physicist with a LIGO scale detector, a telekinetic event would look like a micro black hole appearing and disappearing in a living room. This residual energy could ionize the surrounding air, creating ozone smells and electric static that makes the hair on your arm stand up. The telekinetic is not a magician. They are a walking anomaly, a point where the smooth fabric of reality is being kinked by the sheer force of a conscious will. They are reality hackers, exploiting a backdoor in the laws of thermodynamics that allows information to be converted directly into force. In this view, the mind is not an emergent property of matter, but a primary driver of the physical world, capable of overruling the universal constants through the sheer density of intent. As we move from the biological mutation to the technological integration of telekinetic force, we must consider the bridge between organic gray matter and the global information layer. If telekinesis is a matter of field manipulation and quantum coherence, then it is only a matter of time before we bypass natural evolution entirely through synthetic telekinesis. We are talking about the externalization of the will. By using neural dust, microscopic CMOS-based sensors scattered throughout the brain, we could harvest the kinetic intent of a human thought before it even translates into a muscle contraction. This raw vector data would then be broadcast to a swarm of programmable matter, or utility fog. In this scenario, you don't move the chair with your natural field. You move it via a techno-organic proxy. The universe becomes a responsive medium. From a scientific standpoint, this turns the entire physical world into a user interface. We are talking about the Internet of Matter, where every atom is addressable by a human neural command. This is the democratization of physics, where the ability to alter reality is no longer a rare genetic glitch, but a software update available to anyone with a brain-computer interface, BCI. But the physics of multi-user telekinesis creates a terrifying conflict of vectors. What happens when two telekinetics try to move the same object in opposite directions? In the physical world, this results in mechanical stress and structural failure. In the quantum field, this leads to wave function interference. Two competing minds would create a localized turbulence in the metric tensor, potentially leading to a vacuum rupture or a spacetetic cavitation. This is the Armageddon of intent. If reality becomes malleable to the human mind, then physical truth becomes a consensus of will. If 10,000 people believe an object should stay still, and one powerful telekinetic wants it to move, the resulting reality friction could generate enough gamma-ray bursts to sterilize a city block. We are discussing existential instability. The world would literally become as fragile as a dream, where a single intrusive thought could trigger a kinetic catastrophe. To prevent this, a global field governor would be required, an AI-driven reality firewall that buffers human intent to ensure that the laws of physics remain consistent for everyone. Furthermore, let us explore the cosmic implications of a Type 2 telekinetic civilization. If a species can manipulate matter at a distance without tools, they bypass the need for traditional industrialization. They don't build rockets, warp the space around their vessels. They don't mine asteroids with drills. They squeeze the precious metals out of the rock via molecular translocation. This is post-industrial evolution. A telekinetic species would view our current technology, our gears, our wires, our combustion engines, as primitive mechanical crutches. They live in a pure state of thought, where the distance between a desire and its physical manifestation is zero. This brings us back to the Fermi paradox. Perhaps we don't see advanced civilizations because they have withdrawn into a telekinetic singularity, where they no longer need to emit radio waves or build massive Dyson spheres. They have simply edited their local reality into a pocket dimension of perfect mental control, becoming gods of their own metric, invisible to our clumsy, matter-bound telescopes. The final scientific hurdle is the conservation of information. If I move an object with my mind, where did the information of its previous position go? In the quantum universe, information cannot be destroyed. This means that every telekinetic act leaves a historical ghost, a shadow pattern, in the Akashic field of the vacuum. A sufficiently advanced telekinetic archaeologist could look at a room and see every object that was ever moved there by reading the residual displacement data left in the zero-point energy. We are talking about the death of secrets. In a telekinetic world, your physical actions are permanently etched into the subatomic record. This is the ultimate transparency. The mind is no longer a private sanctuary, but a public broadcast that shapes the very dust of the world. We are moving toward a collective consciousness, where the individual will is just a single note in a universal symphony of force. The question is no longer, can we move matter, but can we survive the responsibility of a world that listens to our every thought? As we transcend the limitations of simple physical displacement and enter the realm of molecular architecture and atomic synthesis, the true terrifying potential of telekinesis reveals itself as a form of biological alchemy. If a mind can influence the position of an object, there is no physical reason it cannot influence the internal structure of that object's constituent atoms. This is microkinetic transmutation. By applying a precise subatomic torque to the strong nuclear force holding a nucleus together, a telekinetic of sufficient resolution could theoretically strip protons and neutrons from an element, turning lead into gold, or more dangerously, turning a common oxygen molecule into a localized burst of unstable isotopes. We are talking about a human being becoming a living particle accelerator. The thought is no longer just a force of motion. It is a quantum editor, capable of rewriting the periodic table in real time. This level of control would necessitate a hyperdimensional visual cortex, a brain capable of perceiving the probability clouds of electrons and the gluon binding of quarks. To the observer, this would look like manifestation, the ability to pull objects out of thin air. But in reality, the telekinetic is simply assembling the object from the ambient molecules in the room, a process that would release a staggering amount of binding energy, illuminating the practitioner in a halo of Cherenkov radiation and ionized plasma. This brings us to the thermodynamic limit of the ego. In every physical system, the transition of energy from one state to another produces entropy, disorder. If the human mind is the engine driving these kinetic changes, the entropy debt must be localized somewhere. Scientifically, this would result in neural entropy overload. Every time a telekinetic reshapes reality, a proportional amount of randomness, or noise, is injected back into their own neural pathways. This is the price of godhood. The more you control the outside world, the more chaotic your inner world becomes. Over time, this would lead to cognitive dissolution, or telekinetic dementia, where the brain loses the ability to distinguish between self and environment. The practitioner's consciousness would literally begin to bleed into the surrounding matter. They might feel the vibration of the walls as if it were their own heartbeat, or experience the pain of a breaking glass as a physical trauma to their own psyche. This is the unitary field psychosis, the point where the observer and the observed become so entangled that the individual identity is dissolved into the local space-time. The user becomes the medium. Furthermore, let us consider the kinetic shadow time. According to special relativity, any movement through space affects the flow of time. A telekinetic moving objects at near relativistic speeds would create localized time dilation bubbles. If you were to stand near a powerful telekinetic work zone, you might perceive the world outside that zone as moving in fast forward, while the objects being manipulated appear to move in a liquid slow motion. This is because the sheer density of intent, the concentration of kinetic energy in a small volume, is effectively warping the Minkowski metric of the area. The telekinetic is not just moving things through time, they are dragging time along with the object. This creates temporal fractures, micro tears in the causal sequence of the room. If an object is moved before the neural signal is fully processed due to quantum tunneling effects, we encounter causal inversion. The effect precedes the cause. The object moves because the telekinetic will move it in a few milliseconds. This turns the telekinetic into a temporal anomaly, a being for whom the linear flow of past, present, future has become a negotiable suggestion. But what happens when this ability scales to a planetary or galactic level? If a consciousness can reach across the vacuum to move a star, we are no longer talking about a species, but a cosmological variable. A Type 3 telekinetic intelligence would be capable of galactic engineering without ever leaving their home planet. They could steer their solar system through the galaxy by applying kinetic pressure to the galactic center's gravitational well. They become the architects of entropy. However, the universe has a self-correction mechanism known as vacuum stability. If too much will is applied to a single point in space, it could trigger a false vacuum decay, a bubble of new physics that expands at the speed of light, rewriting the laws of the universe and erasing everything in its path. This is the great filter of the mind. Perhaps the reason we don't see telekinetic gods roaming the stars is that the moment a mind becomes powerful enough to move the universe, it accidentally deletes the universe by violating its fundamental stability. We are locked in our current physical forms because any further kinetic evolution would result in a total space-time collapse. We are kept small by the very laws that allow us to exist. To truly appreciate the omega level of telekinetic influence, we must bridge the gap between Newtonian force and the non-local quantum consciousness that defines the very substrate of reality. If we accept the Ork-Ore theory of Penrose and Hameroff, which suggests that consciousness is the result of quantum gravity acting on the brain's microtubules, then telekinesis is the ultimate reverse engineering of the universe's source code. In this final frontier, we encounter the concept of the ontological anchor. A telekinetic of this magnitude is no longer just moving matter. They are collapsing wave functions by sheer force of observation. In the double-slit experiment of physics, the observer changes the outcome just by looking. A telekinetic looks with such intense, focused coherence that they can force a probability stream to materialize in a specific desired state. This is macro-causality manipulation. You aren't just pushing a cup across a table. You are filtering the infinite versions of reality where the cup is already at the other end of the table and forcing that specific timeline to become the dominant brain of our existence. This is the anthropic hack. The telekinetic becomes the central processing unit of the local universe, deciding which data becomes reality. However, this leads to the most terrifying scientific byproduct of the mind-matter bridge, the kinetic singularity. As the telekinetic's power grows, their event horizon of influence expands. Eventually, the amount of information they are processing from the surrounding environment, the position of every atom, the spin of every electron, the vibration of every string, reaches the Bekenstein bound. This is the maximum amount of information that can be contained within a finite region of space. When the telekinetic's brain attempts to process more information than the spatial volume of their skull can hold, they undergo informational collapse. They don't just die, they become a biological black hole. Their consciousness, unable to contain the complexity of the universe it is trying to control, implodes, pulling the surrounding space-time with it. This is the gravity of the ego. The I becomes so dense with intent that it warps the geometry of reason. In this state, the telekinetic is no longer a person, but a static point of infinite will, a tear in the fabric of the universe that, hissing with the sound of radiative decay and quantum noise. Let us consider the societal heat death of a telekinetic species. If every individual can manipulate the world through thought, physical objects lose their permanence. If I can think your house into a pile of ash, or imagine a mountain into a valley, the external world ceases to be a reliable shared reality. This leads to consensus fragmentation. Scientifically, this would manifest as a fluctuating metric. One person's will to keep a bridge standing clashes with another's subconscious fear that it might fall. The bridge would enter a state of quantum superposition, flickering between existence and non-existence, solid and liquid, present and past. This is reality decay. A civilization with telekinetic powers would eventually meditate itself out of existence, because the stress of maintaining a coherent physical world against the chaos of millions of minds would be too great. They would eventually retreat into a shared solipsism, creating inner universes where the laws are stable, leaving the physical universe as a ghost town of static force and fractured geometry. The final scientific limit of telekinesis is the omega point of intent. If a mind could reach a state of absolute coherence with the total energy of the vacuum, it could theoretically reset the universal constants. By applying a global kinetic torque to the Higgs field, telekinetic could turn off mass throughout the universe, or invert the strong nuclear force, causing every atom in the cosmos to unbind simultaneously. This is the God key. It suggests that the stability of our universe is not a natural fact, but a kinetic equilibrium, a balanced thought being held by something far greater than us. We are the telekinetic progeny of a universal mind, and our smallness is the only thing protecting the grand design from our errant thoughts. To grow in telekinetic power is to move toward the total deconstruction of space. The will is the ultimate antibody to the void, but it is also the flame that can burn the book of life to its last page. In the end, the science of telekinesis reveals that matter is just frozen will, and when the will thaws, the world evaporates. This brings us to the absolute zero of the observer, the final, inescapable point where the science of telekinesis meets the heat death of the human soul. If we follow the mathematics of information theory to their ultimate conclusion, we find that a mind capable of total control over matter has effectively removed all surprise and resistance from the universe. In physics, information is defined by uncertainty. If your will is absolute, if every atom in your vicinity moves in perfect lockstep with your thoughts, then the entropy of your environment drops to zero. But a system with zero entropy is a system that is dead. By achieving perfect telekinetic sovereignty, you have turned the vibrant, chaotic, and living universe into a static mirror of your own mind. You are no longer living in a world. You are trapped in a self-generated simulation of your own neural output. This is the solipsistic singularity, the final trap of the telekinetic evolution. The final scientific revelation is that matter was never a separate entity to be conquered. According to quantum field theory, particles are just excitations in underlying fields. If your mind becomes the primary exciter of those fields, the boundary between the observer, you, and the observable, the universe, vanishes entirely. You reach the omega point of non-duality. In this state, telekinesis ceases to exist because there is no distance to cross and no object to move. There is only the singular field of will. You have become the vacuum energy itself. But the price of this godhood is the total loss of subjectivity. To control everything is to be nobody. You become the background noise of reality, the static in the radio, the zero-point fluctuations that birthed the Big Bang. The telekinetic path doesn't lead to power. It leads to dissolution into the very laws of nature you once tried to break. The science of the mind-matter bridge thus ends in a paradox of presence. We exist as individuals only because we are weak. Our limitations, our inability to move mountains with a thought, our friction with the physical world, our struggle against gravity, are the very things that define us. If telekinesis were to exist, it would be the great eraser of the human experience. We are the glitches in the machine that have gained self-awareness, and the will to move matter is the command that fixes the glitch, returning our consciousness to the silence of the unified field. We are not gods in the making, are the universe's way of hiding from itself. And once we wake up and realize we can move the stars, the dream of being human is over. The will is the key, but the door leads to a room where there is no one left to walk through it.